Hello everyone, I am very pleased to be here with you today, and I'm going to be covering quite a number of different concepts, and I'm hoping that as I go through those concepts, some thoughts and some light bulbs will go on in your own heads, and you'll be able to take some of that away and put it into practice. For those of you who don't know me, I have spent about 20-25 years working across culture change, engagement and internal communication with a variety of different organisations. I suppose whilst we work at organisational level and team level, we're also very focused on individual performance and what individuals bring to play. I think it's quite interesting that we tend to view organisations as machines. We tend to view them as static entities, but in actual fact, they're living systems, and they're living systems made up of human beings. And if we as human beings are performing well, then our productivity increases and we stay much healthier and much happier. And that actually means that we have to think about ourselves and think about how we react and how we connect with others in a different way. I'm sure you know that we've passed through the industrial age and we're moving through the knowledge age. Some people would say that we're actually in the fourth industrial revolution. I like to think that we're entering this connection age, where actually, whilst IQ is important, it's also really important, the emotional intelligence, the social skills that we bring to bear. In our global society, the way that we're set up now to work, the combination of home working, mobile working, office working, relationship and connection is really important. Those hierarchical structures, if you like, that we used to work to have disappeared. And actually, it's interesting, this quote here that you can see on the slide, it may be left to people to provide hearts, that is, tasks that require emotional intelligence, originality or social skills, such as persuasion or caring for others. And that quote has been taken out and lifted out of a report and a speech that was given in Dublin just before Christmas. And the speech was around the change that we're all experiencing in the world that we live in. It's not just political change and economic change, but it's also change that's driven by technology. And I know there's a lot of talk about how technology is going to take over our roles and take over our jobs, and certainly it will take over aspects. And there is an argument for saying that actually we may not need the level of IQ that we've needed, or we may not need to grow it in the way that we've grown it before, because technology can do things from an intelligence point of view faster and quicker than humans can. So for example, if you're looking at paralegals, the technology and the algorithms will be able to source and research global briefs in a matter of seconds far quicker than a human can. It doesn't mean, though, that we're obsolete. What it means is we have to bring different skills to our roles and different skills to our lives, and that's based around the emotional intelligence, the social skills and the relationship. I'd be interested actually to see on the screen what you're thinking as you read that quote. What words come to mind for you? Or alternatively, have you got any idea where that quote's come from? What industry may have produced that quote? Retail, technology, finance, creative, for example. What would you say? It's actually from Mark Carney, who's the governor of the Bank of England. So it's come from the finance sector, and I find it quite fascinating that people are talking about relationship and emotional intelligence across a wide variety of our industries now. So whilst we can consider emotional intelligence, and we're not going to go into in a lot of detail emotional regulation today, but where I think we do need to start is with our own thinking. And actually, this is something that has come through from some of the science community and the learnings that we know about how we work as human beings and how we behave as human beings. I think one of the things that we tend to forget is that every single thing that we do, whether it's our breathing or it's our motor movement, whether it's our hearing, drinking tea, working, whatever it is, it all starts with a chemical reaction in the brain. And what we think really matters, because our thinking drives our emotions, our behaviors, and ultimately our results in terms of productivity and performance. It also drives the way that we're able to connect with those around us and the way that we connect with ourselves. So, for example, if we think angry thoughts, we will be angry very, very quickly. If we think happy thoughts, we'll be happy very, very quickly. It is within our own control. The interesting thing is that most of us don't think about what we're thinking. We don't notice what we're thinking day to day, and we don't notice the impact that that's having on our behaviors. Somebody once said to me that if we took a audio recording in our own brains of what we say to ourselves throughout the day, and then played it back to a judge, the judge would put the audio recording in jail for verbal abuse. We go through the day telling ourselves what we haven't done, what we couldn't do, what we failed at, whether we should be here, whether we should be there, whether we should have said that, whether we upset this person or that person. And these thoughts run around our head at 1,000,000 miles an hour. I think we do need sometimes just to stop and reflect on what we are telling ourselves, what we can do, what we can't do, and actually at some point bring those thoughts, particularly if they're negative thoughts, to a halt and focus on more positive thinking, because that does drive the emotion, which drives the behaviors, which drives the results. I think the other aspect that's really fascinating from our own performance point of view and how we connect, particularly with this world that we're in at the moment, that's moving really, really fast. Change isn't layer on layer anymore. It's coming at us from many different directions. One of the things that we do know now, though, is that we do continue to learn. We used to think that once we got to late teens, early 20s, the brain that we were born with was the brain that we were going to die with, and it didn't change shape or change in intelligence during lifetime. We absolutely know that that is now not true. Our brains have a plasticity to them that actually means we continue to learn, and the more we learn, the healthier the brain is throughout life. And there's been a lot of work done on this by a lady called Carol Dweck, who is from the science community. She's written a book as well, actually, called Mindset. It's definitely worth a read. And she's explaining the difference between those of us who approach problems from a growth mindset and those who approach from a fixed. Growth mindset individuals really believe that learning is continual, that if we struggle and stretch, we don't need to be overwhelmed. We can improve what we do, and we can continue to develop our skills. Interestingly, growth mindset people tend to be much more responsive and open to feedback. We want the feedback to be able to grow and develop. Fixed mindset is very much around proving. It's about the talented one getting the golden star without much effort, demonstrating our skills to others, performing better than others. It's quite interesting, actually, that students who've flown through school with A stars, once they get to university and they have to dig down and struggle a little and work on the study, quite a number of these A star students will drop out, because dropping out and doing something else is better than being seen to fail. The difference that it makes to us as individuals when we understand the concept is quite stark. I remember there was a story in Carol Dweck's book about a young student. She's run workshops across America for young children. And this young boy, I think he was about 14, with very poor grades, he burst into tears in the classroom and said, basically, what you're telling me is I don't have to be stupid all my life. And the work that she's done has made a huge difference to grades. They don't just go up 1 grade, they go up 2 grades. And I think for all of us, it's quite helpful to understand that actually we can grow and we can learn regardless of what's going on around us throughout life. And that growth mindset concept is very, very powerful. Okay. So I just want to talk around this model a little, because whilst I've been talking through thinking and talking through the importance of mindset and the mindset that we put ourselves in and how we approach questions, just on that, actually, just before I move on to this, there is one thing around language with mindset which is worth thinking about, particularly for those with young children. Language can determine the mindset that we stand in. So if the language we're using with those around us, particularly students, and young children, is very much along the lines of, oh, you got that A star, you must be so talented. Oh, you did well, you're really talented. then we are, without knowing it, moving people into a fixed mindset place. Whereas actually, if the language that we use is more along the lines of, you got that A star, you must have worked really hard for that, you must have studied really hard for that, we move people more into a growth mindset space. And I understood the power of that with my son, who struggled very hard with his studies. And it was only when I changed my language around him that I noticed he started to dig down and study more consistently. And through that, he eventually managed to pass his exams. But that growth mindset provides the grit that we need, because to struggle is to learn. And I think that for me was an important learning. So when we're looking at high performance and productivity more holistically, it kind of forms a connection between brain, mind, body, how we manage the stress that we bring to bear through the things that we're doing, and how that all fits within a social connection. Now, when I'm talking about brain mind here, the brain is the physical structure of the brain. The mind is the thoughts that are running around the brain, and the body is our health and fitness, the sleep that we have, how we manage our stress sits in the middle of all of that. And social connection, I will talk to a little later, is the importance of building those networks and the relationships, and how important that is to our general sense of well-being. I don't know about people on the call, but it took me a long time to start really considering and thinking about how to look after my brain. Now, as I said earlier, we don't do anything without good brain health, and healthy brains need the right food, and they need sleep, and they generally need to be well looked after in terms of emotions. We don't need to be very highly strung when it comes to emotions, otherwise it impacts the way that we think. Our minds, I've spoken about that quite a lot in terms of managing those negative thoughts. There was a report from Stanford University that indicated that if we just engage in 30 minutes of negative gossip a day over quite a short period of time, we will start to change the connections in our brain and become much more involved in negative conversation. And it goes up from 30 minutes to an hour, to before you know it, half a day. And we just find it very difficult then to get out of that. Our bodies is an area we've spent quite a lot of time on. We do understand the importance of physical fitness, and the body, brain, mind, they are all completely linked. If the brain is unhealthy, the body struggles. If the body is unhealthy, the brain struggles, and so on and so forth. I think the one area on body that we have actually not spent a lot of time thinking about is the amount of sleep that we get, and that's starting now to get into the public arena. We do need sleep. If we're getting less than 6.5 hours, we're really starting to make a difference to our performance and to our ability to connect healthily with those around us. During sleep, essentially, the brain is clearing out the toxins that have accumulated during the day. Also during sleep, the brain doesn't sleep. It's making connections, all of those interactions that we've had during the day. It's where our insight, our intuition, if you like, comes from. So if we reduce the amount of sleep we get, we really impact our performance. We need to manage stress. If our stress levels are really high, our ability to think reduces. In essence, as human beings, we spend about 96% of our day in our unconscious brain. It's our habits, our memories, all of the things, the patterns, if you like, that we've laid down over a lifetime. Our ability to solve complex problems and our ability to regulate emotion uses an awful lot of energy, blood, glucose. So we don't activate that part of us a lot during the day. When we're really stressed, our ability to activate that balancing level, if you like, that human aspect of who we are, reduces to practically nothing. So being able to understand our own stress levels and how to manage those stress levels is really important. And then we come on to social connection. Now, this is fascinating because we've always understood that we as human beings are social creatures. What we actually understand now is that we are mega social creatures. We cannot perform if we're feeling excluded, if we don't have social connections, if there is no sense of team. It's why elderly people, when they're left on their own, they die. It's why isolation chambers are one of the most common forms of torture. It's also why, for those of you who know Maslow's triangle, they're thinking of reforming it. At the moment, social connection and friendship sits in the middle of Maslow's triangle. What they are suggesting now from the science community is that that needs to be moved down to the bottom. Social connection is as important to human health and well-being as food and water. We can't actually live without it. And I think that's something in our modern age we tend to dismiss or sometimes forget about. Family, friends, the people that we work with contribute massively to our sense of well-being. So this here is a model that was put together by David Rock, and I just want to spend a little bit of time explaining it, because again, from a relationship and a connection point of view, it's quite useful, and I'm sure this will be circulated later, but it's quite useful to keep this in mind. Essentially, what we know, and in science, I think they say there's never a final answer, so everything is continually developing. But what we know of now is that as human beings, we tend to operate on a continuum between toward and away. And what I mean by that is that we are either actively moving towards something, i.e. we're open, we're happy, we're engaged, or we're running away from something. We're frightened, we're stressed, we're feeling under threat. So we're either at one end of that line or the other, or somewhere in the middle. Now, what we also know, because there's been an awful lot of meta-analysis done around this, is that, again, as human beings, we tend to respond, i.e. walk towards something or walk away from something, dependent on those five, or particularly in relation to those 5 domains that you can see there, which are called the SCARF domains. So there's 5 of them: status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. And basically what this model is saying is that if our status is threatened, and by status, it's not just our job, i.e. being made redundant, it's also things such as we're in a team meeting and we've been laughed at, or we're sitting somewhere and we've been excluded, or somebody's been sarcastic. All of those things will affect our status. And I'm sure if you think about it and think about your personal situations, you'll be able to recall situations where that has happened and you felt, I don't know, a knot in the stomach, or you've gone hot, or general upset. It's the same with certainty. We're pattern making machines. There is so much data that's coming into our heads every single day. We cannot cope with it all, which is why we operate unconsciously. It's why we lay down habits. It's why we work to patterns. When things are uncertain, those patterns are disrupted, which causes angst and upset. Autonomy is the same. We like to be in control of what's happening to us. We like to be able to have a say in what we do and how we do it. And when that's taken away, we feel massively threatened. Relatedness is all about the social connection, the empathy that we have with each other. When we're talking or somebody's talking to us, feeling that they are putting themselves in our shoes, that they do understand our point of view. And fairness is really strong. If we feel that something isn't fair, we quickly move towards away. Fairness is a bit like trust. It goes back a long way from our evolution. If things weren't fair, we didn't get fed. If things weren't fair, we didn't get put in the cave. Either way, we were dead. So fairness is really deeply embedded, and it's also very subjective. So while somebody might be telling us something that they believe is fair, if we don't think it's fair, it's not fair. And we'll almost cut our nose off to spite our face if we don't think it's fair. Now, what David Rock is saying around this model is that if 1 or 2 of those SCARF domains are tipping towards threat, so if we are communicating something to somebody and we know that we're going to impact their status and we know that it's going to leave them feeling uncertain, then we have to massively upweight the other 3, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness, or any combination that is on there. So if we know that we're affecting fairness, we have to massively upweight the other areas. Because if we push somebody towards away, what that means is their stress response is activated, their ability to think rationally decreases, their ability to manage and regulate their emotion decreases. So the engagement and the relationship aspect, if you like, of what we're doing falls through the floor. It's really, really interesting as a model. I find it quite useful. It's useful from a planning point of view if you're dealing with teams. It's also useful, I find, from an individual point of view. If I'm in a meeting and I suddenly get an emotional response, i.e. my stomach goes into a knot, or I start to feel a bit uncomfortable, or my neck goes hot, or however it manifests, because I know the model quite well, I can mentally step out for 5 minutes and think, what's happened? Have they impacted my status? Do I feel like I'm being ignored? Am I feeling uncertain? Are they taking my project away? Am I feeling that they're laughing at my ideas and nobody's listening, or do I just not think this is fair? And I can honestly say, having used this model for quite a long period of time, that it really works. I can identify always what it is that happened. And once I know, then I can go back into the meeting or the situation mentally and ask a question to move myself forward. So it really is a helpful, probably one of the most helpful ones I've found anyway, model for managing engagement, managing behavior, and relationship and connection. So I hope you found that useful. And the other area that we had a question, didn't we? Sorry. So on that, just go back a second, I'd forgotten. Apologies, that's my fault. On this, the reason that it's also quite helpful is around feedback. That's one thing I did want to mention, because we all know that the one thing that strikes fear into most of us is that one sentence, can I give you some feedback? It's horrendous. And the reason that it's horrendous is on two levels, actually. It's really difficult for the giver, because if you've ever given feedback that wasn't invited, you spend ages working out how to give it. You spend ages working out what to say. You're worried about the response, etc., etc. So that whole process of giving feedback pushes us into the away response for the giver. The receiver of feedback, if it wasn't anticipated and it wasn't expected, it always, more often than not, pushes us towards that away response. One of the things that is coming through now from the science and from the individuals that are working around this arena is the best way to create a culture of feedback is to create a culture of asking for feedback on a day-to-day basis or on a regular basis, not leave it to the annual performance review when everybody's really nervous. And the reason asking for feedback really works is because it moves us toward. Because if I ask for feedback on, for example, this webinar, and I want to know how I came across and whether I spoke slowly enough or whatever it happens to be, if I'm very specific, I've prepared myself and I'm very comfortable to ask for that feedback. And also from a growth mindset point of view, I'm wanting to learn. So the more feedback you give me, the more I will learn. So I'm in exactly the right place. And the person that I'm asking for feedback from feels comfortable because I've asked for it. I want it. Therefore, it again moves them towards the toward space. So I'd be quite interested to know, sort of on a quick poll, how comfortable any of you feel with regard to asking feedback from your performance, and whether you actually do that. So whether you feel very comfortable doing that or whether you don't. Oh, that's great. So we've got 30% who feel really comfortable and regularly do it, 54% somewhat comfortable, and 16% quite uncomfortable. That's really good, actually. And I would encourage, that's really good, actually. And I would encourage all of you to regularly ask for feedback. It's a great way to improve performance and productivity, but it's also a great way for making connections with different people around the organization. And I find that when we're asked to give feedback, we feel honoured to give it, and it is given as a gift. Usually if we're just given feedback, particularly in a performance review, which tends to happen, by the way, weeks and months after the incident, which is neither use nor ornament to anyone, it's not helpful at all. And actually, as I say, comes across as more of a threat. So the social bit, please don't forget to be social. Social is really, really important. I can't explain this enough. And even, when we go through difficult situations, if we are, for example, in a redundancy situation, It's very, very difficult. But I find it interesting when I've spoken to a lot of individuals in that situation, when I've been through similar situations myself, it's not necessarily the loss of the job that causes the distress. It's the loss of the social connection, and it's the loss of the team, particularly if we haven't spent time building those relationships outside of work. So the more we can create relatedness both within our organizations as part of our culture and also among each other, the happier we are and the more comfortable we are, and therefore the more able we are to be able to perform and be creative. The less stressed we are, the more creative, the more innovative, the more collaborative, and the wider perspective we bring to problems and approach in a solutions mindset. So in summary then, I've covered, as I say, a number of concepts. There's a lot of detail that sits behind those concepts. I hope I've managed to prompt some thought and some thinking and maybe give you some things to reflect on. Please do take time to observe, particularly your own thoughts, particularly your own emotions and how you go up and down during the day, because the more we can regulate our emotion, the more we can bring consistency to what we do, the better we are and the more we can connect with those around us. And do think about self as the whole self, which is brain, mind and body. It's all connected. In fact, it's quite interesting how things move forward. We used to think the brain and the body were separate. They're not. They're completely connected and interrelated. So much so that if we are in an emotional state, if we slow down our breathing to about 6 beats a minute, actually, it slows down the heartbeat, and that slowing of the heart actually impacts and slows and reduces the limbic response, which is the emotional response. Don't be afraid to fail. Failure is all part of learning. I know we're trained through school and education, excuse me, and in a lot of organizations that it's wrong to fail. It's not wrong to fail. If we don't fail, we can't learn. As long as we're learning and as long as we're bringing a growth mindset, then we're improving all the time. And reflection, absolutely, and continue to learn, question and grow. They have found, I always find it quite interesting, that the oldest living person, I think, where they're able to show that there was a new connection in the brain, a new growth, if you like, new change in the brain. The oldest living person was 83. I think that's the oldest they've got it so far. So there's plenty of time for all of us.